How to build a Blackgates Sweet Pea 5-inch gauge locomotive. This is part 59. Fitting the coupling rods and showing my oiling method modification. Rearranging the workbench and dismantling the cab, followed by a quick look at the saddle tank. The first thing to look at is the oiling modification that I made, although I really didn't make it from the beginning. The previous builder, in inverted commas, had drilled the holes in the end of the metal blocks that hold the bearing brasses together, but they were drilled in the wrong place, not in the middle. I kept the positions the same because they're not very visible when they're fitted to the engine. And besides, applying your oil can to the end of the bearing brasses is a much better idea than oiling the bearing brasses from the top. In this clip, I've split the bearing brasses at each end of the coupling rods. Being very careful not to get them mixed up, they need to go back in exactly the same place as they currently are. If you look at this coupling rod, there's a tiny hole where the brasses meet. This is the original oil hole, but it doesn't work just like that. I always thought this was not the best idea for a lubrication point on very important bearings on a miniature steam locomotive. The main oil hole has to be made bigger, and then the studs have to be relieved to allow the oil to get around the studs and down into the bearing. I really don't think this is a good idea. This hole, for instance, which is currently blocked, was made using a centre drill. The hole is not this diameter all the way through to the bearing, because you need as much bearing surface as possible. The hole in this end of the connecting rod bearing is about the right size. Just the top part needs drilling out with a centre drill. What I've done is turned the coupling rods upside down. They're still exactly as they were, so the rod lengths are going to be fine, but the original oil holes, which were a bit of a mess, are at the bottom, and you can't see them unless you lift the locomotive up to look underneath, which is not going to happen. As you've just seen in the previous clip, I started fitting the nuts using a socket, but it wasn't ideal. I couldn't get it in line. So instead, I used a spanner to fit the rest of them. I ran the chassis up and down the bench, but unfortunately the bench is oily, and this, coupled with the fact that the edges of the flanges don't give a very large surface area, it's quite difficult to roll it up and down the bench smoothly. There aren't any tight spots, it's just that the assembly is slightly tight. This will wear in once I run the engine. The good news is that the quartering, that's the relative positions of the crank pins, is perfect. Whoever quartered this engine did the job properly. The crank pins are all at 90 degrees. It's time now to move the chassis out of the way because I want to do something else at the front of the bench, so I'm sliding it around the side, and the wheels rotate even less in this area. It's very oily because I worked on a 7 1/4 inch gauge Sweet William, which is a larger version of a Sweet Pea, and it did drop quite a lot of oil onto the bench, because when I was running it in, I literally flooded the engine's bearings with oil.
Oh no!
And now the worst cab in the world for a Sweet Pea. I don't know where this came from. I think this cab was originally made for a locomotive which was 7 1/4 inch standard gauge. And here it is in all its putrescence. I mean, come on, there are limits, and this is nowhere near any limit. It's currently not square. At first I thought that the cab roof was wrong, but no, the steel rule tells me that this is okay. Have a look at these roof fittings. This is far from the best workmanship, or in fact any workmanship I've ever seen. In my opinion, whoever put this cab together needs to consider an alternative hobby. The cab sides look like they were laser cut, and the holes are in the correct place because they were probably spotted. But from there on in, it goes downhill very quickly, and the brass spectacle plate is also a bit of a joke. The slot for the reverser's operating lever is in the wrong place entirely, and the least said about the roof the better. What I'm doing is dismantling this cab just to make it take up less space in the workshop. I will run this part of the video at a high speed, not wishing to prolong the agony. As I've mentioned many times, I am not a machinist or an engineer. Having said that, I am a computer engineer and a sound engineer, but that is something entirely different. Personally, I put a lot of effort into the jobs that I do. When I make something, I need it to be made properly. And my belief is every part of a model needs to be a small model in itself. I'm also not very good at welding, neither was the person who did this, dare I say it, welding job on the pieces of angle that hold the rear part of the cab together. This is not even as good as my welding, and welding is definitely not my strong point. If I did a lot of it, I would improve, but it's not something that I need to do very often for the jobs that I work on. In no time at all, I have a kit of parts. I don't really know what to do with them. Part of me wants to throw them in the bin, but I'll stick them in a corner of the workshop for the time being. The parts can't stay here. Now I'm going to show you something completely different. This is the saddle tank that sits on top of the boiler. Well, just above it, it doesn't sit on the boiler. And it's very well made and very well designed. The top part is removable to get inside it. Once I've finished fitting all the pipe adapters, I will need to put some more screws in the top panel that hold it in position because it's moving about. This is the filler cap. It's a casting that I bought from Blackgates Engineering. I look forward to turning this to the correct shape. Here you can see there are insufficient mounting screws to hold the top plate rigidly. I will put this right in due course, but that's it for now. Stay safe, stay healthy, thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.